So I think probably one of the worst pieces of advice that old unhappy husbands give to new ones is don't ever argue with your wife, just tell her she's right and move along. I don't know about you, but I certainly don't know a single woman that wants to be treated like a petulant child that needs to be placated because you have better things to do. And maybe one of the reasons why that dude is so unhappy is because that's how he's lived his life. But the question is, if you're going to have disagreements with your wife, and you are, how do you do it effectively? Well, gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to the 3 rules my wife and I have put in place to make sure that arguments actually achieve something positive. Rule 1 is pretty simple, and it's something that your wife will probably remind you of. You need to remember that you are talking to the person you love the most in the world. When I was in the military, Tina and I had another young couple we were friends with, and they would always make fun of us because of the way we argued. That's because it would sound like, but babe, you need to listen, or sweetie, all I'm saying is this. And the reason why they thought that was funny is because we discovered that when they argued, the language was a lot more colorful, like stand-up comedy routine colorful. They were out to win, and winning for them meant slamming the other person. And the more the comment hurt, the more points they scored. And as you can imagine, that really wasn't conducive to a blissful marriage. But it's not just about the words that you use. Tone and body language matter. A great deal is said with nonverbal communication, and every guy already knows this. If you're talking to someone and they roll their eyes at you, you're probably gonna reach across the table and slap them. So just understand you need to gauge that when you're talking to her. Now, none of what I'm talking about so far is really groundbreaking if you think of it, right? The people that you love can really do the most damage. So along with words and tone, you need to remember this. You probably understand your wife's insecurities better than anyone. And if you use those against her in an argument, you are basically telling her not to be open or vulnerable with you in the future. And a woman that can't be vulnerable with her husband will grow hardened. It's like a form of betrayal. The reason I put it that way is because you are supposed to be the one who makes her feel safe. But if you use her insecurities against her, you cease to be a source of safety. And for you ladies who may have snuck in to watch this, because I thought you might, the same goes for you. If you think the best way to win an argument is by belittling your husband, by making him feel weak or useless, he will most likely close off a side of himself that you may never get back, and it's one you really want. So rule 1, remember, this is the person you love. So modify your words and tone appropriately, but just as importantly, don't use the special knowledge you have about your spouse's vulnerabilities as a weapon against them in a heated argument. All right, rule number 2, and the dudes are gonna love this. Emotions matter, but they don't trump facts and reality. Now, my wife and I agreed on something before we ever got married, and honestly, this was a deal breaker for both of us. So here it was, ready? Objective truth exists. Now, you may think that sounds obvious, but in a world of postmodernism, deconstructionism, and a number of other very impressive sounding philosophies, which amount to utter nonsense when applied in the real world, you just can't be too careful anymore. Now, it helped that our faith reinforced the idea of both objective truth and objective morality. That means when we argue, feelings matter, but they don't trump logic, reason, facts, empirical evidence. And that is a blessing in a marriage. Now, this also means that you need to listen with the intent to understand what the other person is saying, not just for the purpose of responding. Because you can't truly understand the argument and the perspective behind it if you're too busy interrupting. And I know this is true because I struggle with it. And this is something that I've had to work on in my own marriage. Let me give you an example. I remember one time where my wife and I had been discussing a topic for like days, and we could not seem to agree on a course of action. Then we're like driving to the store one morning, and she made an argument that addressed all of my concerns. And I remember just telling her at that moment, I said, okay, that makes sense. We'll do it that way. And she just kind of slowly looked over at me in the car like dumbfounded and said, really? We've been discussing this for 2 days and that's it? And the answer was, yes, that's it. Now, she was pleasantly surprised, but think about this for a second. All of the other arguments that she made were lacking something, and so I opposed them. They didn't properly address points I was making, but her last one did. And so the only logical thing was to agree with her. Now, like the rule says, logic trumps emotions, but emotions still matter. And now, let me give you a different example. One time, very early on in our marriage, I felt my wife was forgetting about this sacred rule of facts and feelings. And so I politely said to her, "Sweetheart, I know this is a very sensitive and somewhat personal topic. And so I just want to make sure that I am doing everything I can to listen with the intent of understanding instead of just responding." Yeah, that is not what I said, like, at all. No, what I said was, "Hey babe, clearly you are not in a state to have a rational conversation about this, so why don't you let me know when you are and we can pick this right back up." Guys, I'm going to tell you right now, you do not want to do that. Because while it is true that in a head-to-head matchup, facts beat feelings, the way you deliver those facts is going to go a long way to ensuring that they are properly received. Now, here's the tough part. For this rule to work, it has to apply equally. And both of you will have to get used at times to telling the other, "You were right and I was wrong." Not because you don't feel like arguing anymore and you just want to let it drop, but because you are able to genuinely appreciate when the other person has made their case. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Rule number 2 is really important to figure out before you get married. But that doesn't mean it can't be established after the fact. Emotions are valid, but they can't trump reality. Because ultimately the goal for both of you is to agree on what is true. And it can be true that the correct answer is also emotionally difficult. And it's fine to acknowledge that. But at the end of the day, you guys are in this together. And I will also say that if you properly apply Rule 1, it actually makes it a lot easier to appreciate Rule 2. All right, so what's Rule 3? Well, guys, finally, and this is the secret sauce to winning the argument with your wife every time. You got to remember that winning an argument with your wife only really makes sense if both of you win. Now, by that, I do not mean just go ahead and placate your wife or compromise in ways that don't make any sense. If your position is the correct one, then you stand by it. And you do the difficult work of explaining it because, quite frankly, you owe that to her. If she is correct, then you have to do the difficult work of admitting you may have been wrong. But what you should really ask yourself is, why are you arguing in the first place? Like, why does the argument matter? Because obviously there's a ton of little things throughout your life that you may disagree on that are really of no importance. But if what you are arguing about is significant in any way, the only real way to win is when both of you do. And the reason for that is because ultimately, I'm not in competition with my wife. I'm not trying to defeat her. I want us to be on the same page because it is her and I against the world. And when we are on the same page, there's a lot we can actually accomplish. If I feel passionately about a course of action or a decision when we have a disagreement, my goal is to demonstrate to her why the approach I am defending or advocating for is what is best, not just for me, but for us. And I'm going to listen to her arguments, not only because I value her insight and discernment, but because I know she also wants the best for me. And the whole point of an argument between us is not for one of us to win, but for both of us to be convinced of a course of action that will make our marriage successful. So there they are, the 3 rules. And they sound pretty simple because, well, they kind of are. But I will tell you this. In execution, they will be difficult to abide by at times. And I'm not going to pretend like that isn't the case. There's another thing I want to address. I can already see it in the comments section. There are going to be people that undoubtedly watch this and listen to me talking about how I interact with my wife and how she interacts with me. And what they're going to say is, well, lucky you. It doesn't work out that way for everyone. And can I just say, yeah, you're absolutely right. The sort of people that sit around complaining about their circumstances, relying on luck to change them, this doesn't work out for them. In fact, nothing works out for them because they want to use luck as some sort of magical talisman to blame for their failure when they didn't put in the work. I am so tired of people pretending that everything is luck. When I say that these are rules that my wife and I established, I mean it. They weren't just good ideas that we apply when we feel like it. These were principles we established and agreed to follow because we care about each other. Now, we don't always execute them perfectly. And in the heat of the moment, tone, condescension, that can all factor in and get the best of us. But we do largely stick to these, and we've found they work very well. And if you're serious about either setting up your future marriage for success or even your current one, then don't act as if it's all dependent upon luck, because I guarantee you it's not. It's about dedication, even when you don't feel like it. And I can tell you this much, when you do learn how to effectively communicate with your wife, it is like unlocking a cheat code that will impact every aspect of your marriage. And yes, guys, I do mean every aspect of your marriage, because there is something incredibly empowering for both of you when you realize that you can take on anything the world throws at you alongside the women you love, because you truly are on the same side.